At my son's funeral, his wife, a woman born from faded money and ambition, insisted on a closed casket. She clutched my hand. Her tears perfectly timed her grief, a masterpiece of performance art. Then, as they lowered the coffin into the cold Georgia clay, my phone vibrated with a text from my dead son. He told me he was alive and that the woman sobbing beside me had orchestrated the entire lie. She thought she was about to inherit a $10 million insurance policy. She had no idea she was the subject of a federal investigation with his retired auditor mother about to become the star witness. Before I tell you how a mother's grief turned into an auditor's fury, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And please hit like and subscribe if you believe a mother's instinct is the sharpest truth detector on earth. The scent of white lilies was the first thing that hit me. It was thick, suffocating, a sweet smell trying to mask the bitterness of the day. Inside the Ebenezer Baptist Church, the air was heavy with a forced reverence. Light streamed through the stained glass windows, painting mosaics of color on the polished oak casket that sat center stage. My son Marcus was inside. Or so I was told. I am Lorraine Vance. At 65, I've audited the books of Fortune 500 companies. I know how to spot a discrepancy, how to find the lie hidden in a column of numbers. And standing there looking at that sealed box, I felt the first tremor of a deep, profound imbalance. Something was wrong. I moved toward the casket, my hand outstretched. I just needed to touch the wood to feel something real. But then a delicate hand was on my arm. Chloe, my daughter-in-law. She was beautiful even in her grief, dressed in a black dress that cost more than my first car. Her blonde hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, her blue eyes brimming with perfectly formed tears. "Lorraine, please don't," she whispered, her voice a practiced, gentle melody. "The coroner. He said the accident was severe. I want us to remember him the way he was. Strong, smiling." Her words were a velvet cage. They sounded like care, but they felt like control. I looked from her flawless face to the casket. Marcus was a fintech developer, not a race car driver. He calculated risk for a living. A severe accident felt like a poorly written line in a script I hadn't been given. I nodded slowly, withdrawing my hand. I allowed her to guide me back to the front pew, playing the part of the frail, heartbroken mother. But beneath my own grief, a cold, analytical part of my mind was taking notes. Discrepancy number 1. No access to the primary asset. When it was her turn to speak, Chloe walked to the pulpit with a poised grace that felt out of place. She pulled out a single folded piece of paper and began to read. Her eulogy was magnificent. It was a love story, a tragedy, a poetic tribute to the brilliant black man she had married. She spoke of his ambition, his kindness, his dream of building a legacy in Atlanta. She cried when she mentioned their future children, the ones they would never have now. The performance was flawless, too flawless. I scanned the crowd. Our family and friends filled the pews, their faces a mixture of sorrow and confusion. I saw Jamal Davis, Marcus's co-founder and best friend since their days at Morehouse. He wasn't crying. He was frowning, his brow furrowed as he watched Chloe. His confusion mirrored my own. I remembered a phone call with Marcus just a few weeks ago. His voice was tight with the stress he was trying to hide. He'd mentioned Chloe's new art investment fund, a venture that had been draining their accounts. "She sees the world differently, Mom," he had said, a weary resignation in his tone. "She sees money as a tool for status. I see it as a tool for freedom." Now watching her perform, I realized she was simply liquidating his assets to fund her own stage show. The procession to the cemetery was a blur of black cars and solemn faces. We stood at the graveside, the red Georgia clay, a stark contrast to the manicured green lawn. The wind was cold, whipping at the canopy set up for the family. As the pastor began his final prayer, a vibration in my coat pocket startled me. I frowned, annoyed at the intrusion. I never brought my phone to a place like this. But I must have forgotten to leave it in the car. I discreetly pulled it out, intending to silence it. But the screen was already lit up. A message from an unknown number. My thumb hovered over the delete button, but something made me pause. I opened it. 3 words stared back at me. "Mom, I'm alive." The world tilted. The pastor's voice faded into a dull roar. The air rushed from my lungs. I gripped the phone, my knuckles white. It had to be a cruel prank, a scam, but my heart, my soul knew. I quickly typed back, my fingers clumsy and shaking. "Marcus, where are you?" I glanced up. Chloe was looking directly at me, her brow furrowed in a perfect pantomime of concern. "Are you all right, Lorraine?" she mouthed. I just nodded, shoving the phone back into my pocket, my heart hammering against my ribs. I tried to focus on the prayer on the dirt being tossed onto the casket, but my mind was a maelstrom. A moment later, I felt it again. Another vibration. My hands trembled as I pulled the phone out once more, shielding the screen from view. A new message from the same number. "Can't say now. They're watching. Just don't trust my wife." I looked up from the glowing screen. Chloe was now openly crying, dabbing at her eyes with a silk handkerchief as the coffin was lowered. The perfect grieving widow, a liar, a conspirator. And as I stood there at my son's fake funeral, the years of grief I had prepared for vanished. They were replaced by a cold, hard resolve. The numbers didn't add up. The story was a fraud, and this was no longer a graveside. It was an audit, and I was about to examine every single line item. Walking back into my son's house felt like stepping onto a stage. It was Chloe's stage, of course. The sprawling Buckhead villa with its cold marble floors and minimalist furniture had her fingerprints all over it. Marcus had loved warm wood and comfortable chairs, but this place was an art gallery, a showroom designed to impress, not to be lived in. Guests moved through the high-ceilinged rooms with champagne flutes in their hands, their hushed conversations a polite hum beneath the somber classical music drifting from hidden speakers. This wasn't a wake. It was a networking event with better catering. I let my shoulders slump, allowing the weight of the day to become a costume I could wear. I accepted a glass of water from a passing waiter, my hand trembling slightly, a tremor I manufactured for anyone who might be watching. From a corner in the grand living room, I began my audit. My eyes, which everyone assumed were clouded with sorrow, were actually scanning, taking inventory. Chloe was magnificent. She drifted from one cluster of wealthy guests to another, a hand on an arm here, a sad, brave smile there. She was collecting sympathy like it was a currency, and in this room it was. Then I saw him. He was standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a sterile, perfectly manicured garden. He was handsome in a way that felt generic, like an actor cast as the wealthy boyfriend. He was white-dressed in a tailored suit that was a shade too fashionable for a funeral, and he was not sad. As Chloe approached him, the energy between them shifted. Her public grief evaporated, replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. They stood closer than was appropriate, their heads nearly touching. I saw his hand briefly touch the small of her back. It wasn't a gesture of comfort. It was a gesture of ownership. I needed to get closer. Using the excuse of finding a ladies' room, I began a slow, unsteady path around the perimeter of the room. My age and my supposed grief were my invisibility cloak. No one pays attention to a heartbroken old woman. As I passed behind a large, abstract sculpture, their voices became clear, sharp whispers cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "Have to liquidate the tech assets first," the man was saying, his voice low and urgent. "It's the cleanest way. His mother might be an issue." Chloe replied, her tone stripped of all its earlier softness. It was cold hard like chipping ice. "We'll handle her. Once you have the full power of attorney, she's just a formality. The important thing is that we move soon, before the board gets restless. Power of attorney. Liquidate assets. Soon." The words struck me not with the force of a blow, but with the cold, clear precision of a scalpel. They confirmed every suspicion, every discordant note I had felt since that morning. This wasn't just about insurance money. This was a hostile takeover of my son's life's work. My son wasn't even cold in his fake grave, and they were already carving up his legacy. I steadied myself against the wall, taking a deep, shuddering breath that was only partially an act. The mission was clear now. The paper trail Marcus had hinted at had to be in his office. I needed access, and I needed it now. I straightened up and walked directly toward Chloe. She turned as I approached, her mask of sorrow instantly slipping back into place. The man beside her gave me a polite, dismissive nod and melted back into the crowd. "Chloe, my dear," I said, my voice quiet and intentionally frail. "It's all a bit much for me. The people, the noise." I let my gaze drift toward the sweeping staircase. "Would you mind terribly if I went and sat in Marcus's office for a while, just to be in his space, to feel close to him?" It was the perfect request, a sentimental grieving mother wanting to cling to her son's memory. To refuse would look cruel. Chloe's face softened into a mask of perfect empathy. "Of course, Lorraine," she said, her voice dripping with pity. "You take all the time you need. I'll make sure no one disturbs you." She thought I was going upstairs to cry over photographs. She had no idea I was going upstairs to open the books on her. I gave her a grateful, watery smile. "Thank you, dear. You are so thoughtful." As I turned and walked toward the stairs, I could feel her eyes on my back. They were not eyes of sympathy. They were the eyes of a warden confident that the prisoner was safely locked in her cell of grief. The sounds of the party began to fade with each step I took, replaced by the steady rhythmic beat of my own heart. The hunt had begun. I closed the heavy office door behind me, and the muffled sound of the party downstairs vanished. Silence. This was Marcus's sanctuary. Unlike the rest of the house, this room was him. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled not with decorative objects, but with books on coding, market analysis, and economic theory. A framed photo of the two of us at his Morehouse graduation sat on his desk, a rare crack in his professional armor. The room was immaculate, organized with a precision that I recognized as my own genetic trait. This was a space where facts were respected. I ignored the leather-bound journals, the sentimental trinkets. Chloe might search there for a hidden will or a love letter. I wasn't interested in words meant to deceive. I was interested in the one thing that could not lie: the numbers. I sat down in his large, ergonomic chair, which sighed softly under my weight. His dual monitors were asleep black mirrors reflecting my own determined face. I touched the mouse and they blinked to life, displaying a simple, clean desktop. A single icon was in the center of the screen, a stylized gold vault. Marcus had called it the Vance Vault, his encrypted cloud server where he kept everything important. A password prompt appeared. My heart beat a little faster. This was the first real door. I could call Jamal, ask him to hack it. But I knew my son. The password would be a test, a key he knew only I would hold. It wouldn't be his birthday or his social security number. It would be something from our shared history, a piece of data from a time before Chloe. I thought back to his childhood, to a scruffy little terrier mix he'd loved more than anything. I typed in the name, Sparky. The password box vanished. The vault opened. It wasn't a mess of random files. It was an auditor's dream. Folders were neatly labeled: corporate taxes, investment portfolio, personal finances. My eyes scanned the list, and one folder immediately snagged my attention. Insurance. I clicked it. Inside a single PDF document. I opened it. It was a life insurance policy. The insured Marcus Vance. The beneficiary Chloe Vance. The payout $10 million. The date the policy was signed and activated was less than 3 months ago. The motive was sitting right there, clean, simple, and damning. This was the story Chloe wanted the world to see. A tragic accident, a grieving widow, a massive payout. But it was too clean. $10 million was a lot of money, but Marcus's company was valued at over 9 figures. It didn't make sense. I went back to the main directory. I needed to see the flow of cash, the daily transactions. I opened a folder labeled Active Accounts. It contained dozens of spreadsheets updated in real time. My eyes flew across the columns and rows, my brain, long dormant from retirement, snapping back into its old rhythm. And then I saw it. A recurring wire transfer once a month for the last 6 months from the company's primary operating account. The amounts varied, but they were all large. $50,000, $100,000. The recipient was a company I didn't recognize, CL Ventures. CL Chloe's initials. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. The discrepancy. The red flag waving in a sea of black ink. I clicked on the folder. Inside was a collection of invoices, all of them vague, citing consulting fees and strategic investments. There were no prospectuses, no business plans, no quarterly reports. It was a black hole, and millions of dollars from my son's company were being poured directly into it. Beside the list of transfers Marcus had left, a digital sticky note, a small yellow square on the screen. His words were a message from the grave. Investment into what? No reports, no returns. Need to check. He knew. He had already found the anomaly. He was already auditing his own wife. Suddenly, the memory of that phone call, the one I had overheard a few weeks ago, came rushing back with chilling clarity. I had been in the kitchen, and Marcus was in the living room, his voice lower than usual, but tight with a coiled anger I rarely heard. "You can't just keep pulling money out of the company account, Chloe." He had said the word sharp and clipped. "That's not our personal piggy bank. That's investor money. There are legal and fiduciary responsibilities." I couldn't hear her reply, but his next words were filled with a deep, aching frustration. "A gallery opening is not a capital investment. We've talked about this. The spending has to stop." At the time, I had dismissed it as a simple marital spat over money. Now I saw it for what it was. It wasn't a fight, it was a confrontation. Marcus had found the leak. He was about to turn off the tap. And Chloe, along with her mysterious partner, had decided it was cheaper to eliminate the auditor than to balance the books. My son hadn't died in an accident. He had been erased like a line item in a fraudulent ledger. I saved a copy of the entire Vance vault to a small encrypted flash drive I always carried on my keychain. As the data flowed, I felt a cold calm settle over me. The time for grief was over. The audit had just begun. 3 days later, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, I saw Chloe standing on my porch holding a large insulated food carrier. It was a jarring sight. Chloe did not belong in my quiet middle-class neighborhood with its manicured lawns and sensible sedans. She looked like a runway model who had taken a wrong turn. I opened the door. "Lorraine," she said, her voice soft and full of a manufactured warmth. "I was so worried about you all alone here. I brought some soup from that little place Marcus loved." She pushed past me into the foyer, her expensive perfume instantly invading my small, clean house. She placed the carrier on my dining table as if she owned the place, her eyes doing a quick, dismissive sweep of my comfortable, lived-in surroundings. She was assessing my net worth, I realized, gauging the size of the remaining obstacle. She turned back to me, her face a carefully constructed mask of concern. "How are you holding up?" "Really, I'm managing," I said, keeping my voice neutral. I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me weak. "I know you are." "You're so strong," she cooed. "But you've been through the unimaginable. And there are so many details to handle. The estate, the company shares, the taxes. It's a labyrinth. It would overwhelm anyone, let alone someone who is grieving." She opened her designer handbag and pulled out a sleek, leather-bound folder. She placed it on the table next to the soup. The sound it made was a soft, final thud. "My lawyer," she continued, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper, "he was kind enough to draw these up, just to make things easier on you." She opened the folder. Inside was a thick stack of papers filled with dense legal jargon. But I didn't need to read the fine print. My eyes, trained by 40 years of scanning contracts, went directly to the title at the top of the first page. Durable Power of Attorney. "I know you must be in shock, Lorraine," she said, her hand resting gently on the documents. "This just allows me to handle the administrative side of things for you, to talk to the bankers, to deal with the board, just until you're feeling more like yourself again. Think of me as your temporary shield." A shield. That's what she called it. I looked at the papers and I saw them for what they were. A weapon, a gag, a legal instrument designed to render me powerless. She wasn't just trying to secure Marcus's $10 million policy. She was trying to seize control of everything. My assets, my voice, my ability to fight back. She thought I was just a sad old woman too addled by grief to understand the chess move she was making. She saw my quiet home, my simple life, and she had written me off as a non-threat. It was the single greatest miscalculation of her life. I looked up from the papers and met her gaze. I let a small, weary smile touch my lips. "That is very thoughtful of you, Chloe," I said, my voice gentle but clear. I slowly pushed the folder back across the table toward her. "But it won't be necessary." Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. "Lorraine, this is for your own good. To protect you—" "Thank you, dear," I interrupted, my tone still soft but with an edge of hardened steel just beneath the surface. "But I am still quite lucid enough to manage my own affairs." For a single beautiful second the mask slipped. The empathy vanished from her eyes, replaced by a flash of cold reptilian fury. Her jaw tightened and the corner of her perfectly painted mouth twitched. She saw me, not as a grieving mother but as an adversary. She had played her card and I had refused to fold. Then just as quickly the mask was back in place. She gave a little laugh, a brittle, unconvincing sound. "Of course, I didn't mean to presume, I just want to help." "I know," I said. And I did. I knew exactly what she wanted. She gathered the folder, her movements stiff and precise. The friendly visit was over. She made a few more empty offers of help before leaving the expensive soup sitting on my table like a forgotten prop. I locked the door behind her and leaned against it, my heart beating a steady, determined rhythm. The lines had been drawn. Chloe had declared war, assuming she was fighting a crippled old woman. She had no idea she was facing an auditor with a lifetime of experience and nothing left to lose. After leaving my son's house, I didn't go home. I went to a small diner with a cracked linoleum counter and the smell of old coffee baked into the walls. From a worn vinyl booth, I made a call. Jamal Davis. Marcus's co-founder, his other half in business, and his brother in all but blood answered on the second ring. His voice was thick with exhaustion. I kept my request simple. I needed to talk to him somewhere private. He was hesitant, the suspicion clear even over the phone. Chloe had done her work well, planting seeds of doubt, painting him as a vulture circling a fresh kill. But I was his friend's mother. He couldn't refuse. Not completely. We met the next afternoon at a small coffee shop in Decatur, far from the upscale neighborhoods where Chloe and her circle held court. I arrived first, choosing a small table in the back corner. The place was filled with students and the low hum of quiet conversation. It felt safe. When Jamal walked in, I barely recognized him. The last time I'd seen him at a company barbecue, he was vibrant and laughing. Now he looked like a man who had aged a decade in a week. His shoulders were slumped and dark circles pooled under his eyes. He approached my table with the cautious, weary gait of a soldier walking into a truce negotiation. He didn't sit down right away. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice flat. "I'm deeply sorry for your loss. Marcus, he was my brother." He paused, his jaw working. "But if you're here because Chloe sent you to talk about the buyout of his shares, you can save your breath. I'm not selling." The accusation hung in the air between us, sharp and ugly. He saw me as her messenger, a pawn in her game. I didn't flinch. I had expected this. Emotion wouldn't work here. Pleading would only deepen his suspicion. I had to speak his language, the language he and Marcus had built their company on: data. "I haven't spoken to Chloe about shares, Jamal," I said calmly. "I'm here because I reviewed my son's finances." I reached into my handbag and pulled out a single folded piece of paper, not the flash drive. That was my ace in the hole. This was just an opening bid. I slid the paper across the table. It was a printout of the spreadsheet, a simple, clean ledger showing the six-figure wire transfers from his company's account to a single entity. "I have a question about CL Ventures," I said. "Perhaps you can explain these consulting fees to me." Jamal picked up the paper, his eyes scanning the columns. For a moment, he just stared, his face a mask of confusion. He traced the line of transactions with his finger, his brow furrowed. Then I saw it. The flicker of recognition. The confusion hardening into a dawning, sickening understanding. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, and for the first time the wall of suspicion between us began to crumble. "Where did you get this?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "From Marcus," I replied simply. He was keeping his own books. Jamal slumped into the chair opposite me, the fight draining out of him. He ran a hand over his face, the paper trembling slightly in his other hand. "CL Ventures." He said the name, tasting like poison in his mouth. Of course, CL Chloe Langford. That was her maiden name. He leaned forward, his voice dropping so low I had to strain to hear him. "That company. It belongs to her ex-boyfriend, a guy named Julian Croft. He's a professional charlatan, a grifter who moves from one failed startup to the next, leaving a trail of debt behind him. Chloe's been trying to get Marcus to invest with him for over a year." The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture more ugly than I could have imagined. "Marcus refused," Jamal continued, his voice now laced with a bitter anger. "He saw right through the guy. He told Chloe he wouldn't let a parasite like that anywhere near their finances or the company. They had a huge fight about it maybe a month ago, the biggest I ever knew them to have." He looked at the paper again, then back at me, his eyes filled with a terrible new light. "He told her he was cutting her off from the business accounts completely. He said the free ride is over, Chloe. That was the last real conversation I ever had with him." The air in the coffee shop seemed to grow thin and cold. The final argument. The final threat. The motive wasn't just a $10 million policy. It was the end of an endless stream of cash. It was the rage of a woman whose ATM was about to be shut down for good. Jamal carefully folded the paper and slid it back to me. "She's been telling the board I'm trying to stage a hostile takeover. he said, his voice quiet but firm. "She's trying to push me out so she can get her hands on everything." He looked at me, his eyes now clear and focused. The suspicion was gone, replaced by a grim alliance. "She's not just stealing his money, Mrs. Vance. She's trying to erase his legacy, erase him, erase—" "I know," I said. "We can't let that happen," he stated. "It wasn't a question. It was a vow." "No, Jamal," I agreed, meeting his gaze. "We won't." In the quiet corner of a noisy coffee shop over a single piece of paper, the resistance was officially formed. Jamal's home office was the polar opposite of my son's. Where Marcus's space was a testament to minimalist order, Jamal's was a chaotic symphony of controlled genius. Wires snaked across the floor like vines, 3 monitors glowed with scrolling lines of code, and the low hum of a server rack filled the small room. It was late, and the coffee in the mug beside me had long gone cold. For 2 hours I had sat in silence, watching Jamal's fingers fly across the keyboard. He wasn't just looking at the company's books. He was performing a deep tissue massage on its digital soul. Finally, he leaned back, rubbing his tired eyes. "You were right," he said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. "The transfers are there, but they're buried deep." She used a series of shell corporations and encrypted transactions. It's a professional job. She was laundering the money, washing it clean. Trying to trace it would take the authorities months, maybe years. He shook his head in a kind of weary admiration. "It's disgustingly brilliant." My heart sank. A long, drawn-out legal battle was a war of attrition. A fight I wasn't sure I had the resources or the time to win. Chloe would hire the best lawyers, burying the truth under an avalanche of motions and delays. But Jamal wasn't finished. He leaned forward again, his eyes fixed on one of the screens. "But there's something else," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "Something that doesn't belong." He pointed to a string of code highlighted in green. "This script, it's not part of our platform. It's a ghost. But I know that style. That's Marcus's digital handwriting. It's a personal protocol he must have embedded himself off the books." For the next 20 minutes he worked with a renewed intensity, his fingers a blur. He muttered to himself, running diagnostics, bypassing security layers that Marcus himself had built. I watched, holding my breath, as he peeled back the layers of his friend's final secret. Suddenly he stopped. He stared at the screen, his face pale in the monitor's glow. "Oh, Marcus," he whispered, his voice full of a sudden, profound sorrow. "You clever, clever man." He turned to me, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and horror. "Mrs. Vance," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "This is a contingency plan." Marcus built a dead man's switch. I just looked at him, waiting. The term sounded ominous, final. He took a deep breath, trying to translate the complex code into simple truth. "It's an automated protocol. It's tied to his personal login. If his credentials aren't used to access the company's core server for 30 consecutive days, the switch is triggered." "Triggered to do what, Jamal?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "On the 30th day," he said, his gaze unwavering, "the system will automatically compile a data packet. Everything we've been looking for. The wire transfers to CL Ventures, the fraudulent invoices, the offshore account details, everything Chloe has been doing for the past year. Then it will encrypt the packet and send it to 2 recipients." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. "The first recipient is an anonymous tip-line email address for a joint task force at the FBI and the IRS that handles high-level financial crimes." He looked at me, his expression softening into one of deep empathy. "The second recipient, Mrs. Vance, is you." The air left my body in a silent rush. I leaned back in my chair, the world seeming to tilt on its axis. It all became devastatingly clear. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a random act of greed. My son knew. He knew he was in danger. He knew Chloe was capable of this. He couldn't go to the police. He had no concrete proof, only the data that he, a loving husband, had found. So he prepared for the worst. He built a weapon that would only fire after he was gone. He created a final, irrefutable testimony that would be delivered from beyond the grave. And he made me, his mother, the executor of his final will. He had been playing a chess game for his own life, and he had set me up to make the final winning move. "How long?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Jamal checked a digital calendar on his screen. The funeral was 20 days after he last logged in, he said quietly. Today is day 20. The switch triggers in 10 days. 10 days. A ticking clock. A bomb set by my own son. We didn't need to go to the police and try to convince them with circumstantial evidence. Marcus was about to deliver a signed confession directly to the federal government. Our job had changed. We weren't investigators anymore. We were stage managers. We had 10 days to ensure that when that bomb went off, Chloe was sitting right at the center of the blast with nowhere to run. The 10th day arrived not with a storm, but with the clinking of champagne glasses and the soft murmur of Atlanta's elite. The High Museum of Art had been transformed into a shrine to Chloe's ambition. Crystal chandeliers cast a glittering light over the marble floors of the grand atrium. A string quartet played softly in the corner. And everywhere, on every projection screen, on every program, was Marcus's face smiling benevolently over the name of the foundation he had unknowingly funded, the Marcus Vance Memorial Fund for Emerging Artists. It was the grandest stage Chloe could build a monument to her own performance. I had watched her on the local news that morning, her face a perfect portrait of noble grief as she spoke about continuing Marcus's legacy of giving back. She was brilliant, I had to admit. She had taken his name, his reputation, and his money, and was using them to purchase the one thing she craved above all else, social coronation. Tonight, she was not a widow. She was a philanthropist, a patroness of the arts, the queen of a city that adored a good story. When Jamal and I arrived, the gala was in full swing. He looked sharp and composed in a dark tailored suit, his presence a quiet statement of authority. I had chosen my own outfit with the care of a general preparing for a final battle. I wore no black. Instead, I had chosen a deep emerald green dress, simple, elegant, and severe. My silver hair was swept back, and the only jewelry I wore was a single understated pearl necklace. We were not here to mourn. We were here to close an account. As we stepped into the atrium, a ripple of whispers went through the crowd. Heads turned. Chloe, who was holding court near a massive ice sculpture of a swan, froze when she saw us. For a fraction of a second, her practiced smile faltered. It was a tiny crack in the porcelain mask, but I saw it. Surprise, annoyance, and perhaps a flicker of fear. She had not expected us. She had certainly not expected us to look like this. We were not the defeated, grieving family members she had cast in her play. We were an unscheduled plot twist. She recovered instantly, gliding toward us, her shimmering gown trailing behind her like a royal train. "Lorraine Jamal!" she exclaimed, her voice loud enough for those around her to hear. "I'm so glad you could make it. I know how hard this must be." She enveloped me in a cold, papery hug, her perfume cloying and sweet. "You've done a wonderful job, Chloe," I said, my voice even and calm. "Marcus would have been impressed." Her eyes narrowed slightly at my choice of words, but she kept smiling. "It's what he would have wanted," she said, before turning her attention to Jamal, her tone shifting. "Jamal, I'm surprised to see you. I heard you were busy with transition documents at the company." It was a subtle jab, a reminder to the listening ears that he was the usurper, the one trying to profit from tragedy. Jamal met her gaze without flinching. "I wouldn't miss a night honoring my partner's legacy," he said smoothly. "And as the acting CEO, it's my duty to be here." Checkmate. Her smile tightened. She murmured a polite excuse and drifted away, swallowed back into the adoring crowd. But her composure was ruffled. Our presence had changed the temperature in the room. For the next hour, we moved through the gala, a silent two-person auditing team. Jamal spoke with board members and investors, shoring up alliances. His presence a calm and steady counterpoint to the narrative Chloe had been spinning. I simply observed. I listened to the speeches, watched Chloe accept an award on Marcus's behalf, her voice breaking with emotion at all the right moments. She was at the absolute peak of her power, bathed in the spotlight, adored and pitied and celebrated. It was the perfect moment to bring down the curtain. I found her near a quiet gallery wing, posing for a photo with the mayor. As the camera flashes subsided, I stepped forward. "Chloe," I said, my voice cutting through the chatter, "could I have a word with you in private?" She looked annoyed at the interruption, but in front of the mayor she had no choice. "Of course, Lorraine." She followed me into an empty gallery filled with stark modern paintings. The silence in the room was a stark contrast to the noise of the party. The door swung shut behind us, muffling the sound of the string quartet. She faced me, crossing her arms, her patience clearly wearing thin. "Is everything all right?" I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch, letting her carefully constructed poise begin to fray. I walked over to a large abstract canvas of chaotic red and black strokes. "It's a powerful piece, isn't it?" I mused. "It looks like a balance sheet that's been set on fire." I turned to face her. The time for sentiment was over. The time for grief was over. It was time for the audit. "Chloe," I began, my voice calm, professional, and devoid of all emotion. "I've had some time to review the estate documents. As Marcus's mother, I'm sure you understand my need for clarity." She stood a little straighter. "Of course." I started with the new insurance policy. I continued, ticking off the items on a mental ledger. $10 million. A prudent, if somewhat recent decision. I paused, then took a step closer. Then I looked at the corporate accounts, specifically the outflow, and I found a series of very substantial payments made over the last 6 months to a holding company, CL Ventures. I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes, a tiny, almost imperceptible widening of her pupils. She opened her mouth to speak, to lie, to deny, but I didn't give her the chance. "And here's the most interesting part of the audit, Chloe," I said, my voice dropping slightly. "I did a little digging into CL Ventures. It's a fascinating company. It has no employees, no products, and no assets. And as of last week, it officially filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy." I stopped directly in front of her, my gaze as sharp and unyielding as a penknife. "So my question as a concerned mother and an interested party in my son's estate is quite simple." I let the final question hang in the cold, silent air between us. "Where did all the money go, Chloe?" A strange, ugly sound escaped Chloe's throat. It was a laugh, but brittle and sharp, like glass breaking. "Where did the money go?" she repeated, her voice dripping with condescending pity. "Oh, Lorraine, you really have lost your mind, haven't you? Grief does terrible things to people." She took a step toward me, her expression shifting into one of theatrical concern. "You're confused. You've been through a trauma. You're concocting these wild fantasies, these conspiracies, because it's easier than accepting the truth that Marcus is gone." She shook her head, a sad, practiced motion. "You have no proof of any of this. It's the rambling of a grieving, delusional old woman. No one will ever believe you." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply looked down at the elegant, simple watch on my wrist. The second hand was sweeping silently past the 12. "I don't need proof, Chloe," I said, my voice as calm and steady as a flatline. Marcus left it. Her condescending smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" "He was a brilliant man." "My son. He always had a contingency plan," I explained, looking up from my watch to meet her gaze. "He built a little program into his company's servers. A final gift. He called it the final audit report." I let the words hang in the air, watching the confusion in her eyes war with a rising tide of panic. "And it was sent," I said, my voice dropping to a quiet final whisper, "exactly 5 minutes ago." Chloe just stared at me, her mind clearly racing, trying to process the threat. She opened her mouth to bluff, to call me a liar, but no sound came out. She was recalculating, and for the first time she was coming up with the wrong answer. And in that precise moment, the heavy gallery door swung open. It wasn't a waiter, it wasn't a guest. 2 men stood in the doorway. They were dressed in dark, conservative suits that were a world away from the designer tuxedos of the party outside. They were quiet, professional, and their presence sucked all the air out of the room. They looked past me and fixed their calm, unwavering gaze on Chloe. One of the men took a step forward, reaching into his jacket and pulling out a small leather wallet. He flipped it open, revealing a gold badge. "Mrs. Chloe Vance," he asked, his voice polite, professional, and utterly devoid of emotion. "My name is Special Agent Davies. This is Special Agent Cho. We're with the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The color drained from Chloe's face, leaving her skin a waxy, translucent white beneath her expensive makeup. She looked like a statue, a perfect sculpture of disbelief and horror. The agent took another step into the room. "We have a few questions for you regarding several wire transfers connected to your husband's company and a matter of potential money laundering. We'd appreciate it if you could come with us." I didn't watch her crumble. I didn't need to. I had seen enough numbers in my life to know when an account has been zeroed out. The Special Agent Davies murmured something to her, a quiet instruction. Chloe didn't seem to hear him. She was a porcelain doll, frozen in a silent scream. The other agent gently took her arm. The touch was light, but the implication was as heavy as steel. It was time to go. They guided her out of the gallery and back into the grand atrium. For a moment, nobody noticed. The string quartet was playing a lively piece and the air was thick with laughter and conversation. They were halfway across the marble floor when the mayor, who had been chatting near the entrance, saw them. He stopped mid-sentence, his wineglass frozen halfway to his lips. His confusion was a signal, a silent alarm that rippled through the room. One by one, the conversations faltered. The laughter died in people's throats, and then the music following the lead of the room trailed off into a discordant silence, dead silence. The only sound was the soft rhythmic click of their shoes on the marble floor. Hundreds of pairs of eyes, the eyes of the most powerful people in Atlanta, were fixed on the trio. They watched as Chloe, the radiant hostess, the benevolent queen of the evening, was escorted toward the exit by two men in dark suits. Her face was a blank mask of ruin, her shimmering gown suddenly looking like a cheap costume. No one shouted. No one gasped. The silence held for a long, pregnant moment, and then a new sound began. It started at the edges of the room and spread inward, a dry, rustling sound like fire catching in dry grass. Whispers. The sound of her entire world, the social standing she had killed for, turning to ash in a matter of seconds. In their eyes, she was no longer a tragic widow. She was a scandal, a cautionary tale, a juicy piece of gossip to be traded over brunch for the next 6 months. For Chloe, I knew that was a fate far worse than any prison. This public execution of her reputation was the one sentence she could never survive. Jamal touched my elbow gently. It was time. Our work here was done. We turned without looking back and walked toward a side exit, leaving the whispers and the wreckage behind us. We didn't need to see the flashing lights outside. We didn't need to hear the charges being read. The numbers had been presented. The ledger had been balanced. The cold, hard, irrefutable data, the final testimony of my son, was now doing its quiet, relentless work. Justice, I thought, isn't always the sound of a gavel. Sometimes it's just the silent, perfect math of a final audit. 3 months later, the autumn sun cast a warm, golden light over the streets of the old Fourth Ward. I was sitting at a small table outside a coffee shop, a place with worn brick walls, and the rich, comforting smell of roasted beans. The sounds of the city were a gentle backdrop. The distant rumble of the MARTA train, the laughter of students from a nearby cafe, the rustle of newspapers. The world had moved on, and so I was learning, could I? Chloe's trial had been swift. The evidence Marcus had compiled was irrefutable. Her name was now a permanent fixture in the city's archives of spectacular flameouts. I took no joy in it. It was simply the logical end to a fraudulent transaction. My phone buzzed softly on the table. For a moment, my body tensed, a residual echo of that day at the cemetery. But the feeling passed. It was just a phone now. The number was blocked unrecognized. There was no text, just an image. I opened it. It was a photograph of a beach deserted and wild, bathed in the soft, multicolored light of a new sunrise. The waves were gentle, and the sand was a clean, untouched canvas. Below the picture were 6 simple words. I've started over. Thank you, Mom. I looked at the image for a long time, tracing the line where the ocean met the sky. I saw my son not as a victim or a fugitive, but as a man standing on the shore of a new life, finally free. All the chaos, the fear, the cold, methodical anger of the past few months, all of it had been for this single, quiet picture of peace. I didn't reply. There was nothing more that needed to be said. I simply locked the screen and set the phone back down on the table. A real smile, a warm and genuine smile that reached my eyes, spread across my face. I picked up my coffee cup, the ceramic warm against my hands, and took a sip. I watched a young couple walk by holding hands. I watched a cyclist pedal leisurely down the street. I was not a hero. I was not an avenger. I was a mother who loved her son. I was an auditor who believed in the integrity of the bottom line, and I had finally balanced the books. Justice isn't always loud. It isn't always a victory shouted from the rooftops. Sometimes it is simply the quiet, satisfying click of the last number being put back in its proper place. This story serves as a powerful reminder that true strength often resides not in loud accusations but in quiet competence. Lorraine Vance was dismissed as a grieving elderly woman, but she wielded her life's experience as an auditor like a weapon. She reminds us that the truth, much like a well-kept ledger, has its own integrity. Deception and greed can create a spectacular illusion, but they cannot withstand a meticulous audit. It teaches us to look beyond appearances, to trust in the power of facts, and to never ever underestimate a person who has nothing left to lose. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who completely underestimated you? Let us know in the comments below. If you believe in the power of quiet strength and a mother's resolve, please like this video and subscribe for more stories.